Tonight on Primetime Politics, not backing down.
We're going to use every tool in our toolbox to defend Ontarians.
The Ontario Premier says he is serious about his threat, willing to withhold energy exports to the United States if his province is slapped with heavy tariffs. Coming up, we will speak to our political strategists. Do these warnings help when Ottawa and the provinces are trying to avert a trade war? Also,
$200 billion new dollars. Every time I say that number, I have to pause and I have to smile.
It's a win-win deal.
A new agreement for Churchill Falls will examine the impact of this multi-billion-dollar hydro deal that also has the power to end generations of resentment. And how investing on Arctic defense could create an economic boom for Canada. This is Primetime Politics. Hello everyone, I'm Michael Serapio. The Ontario Premier is getting attention on both sides of the border. Last night, after the First Ministers met, Doug Ford said Ontario would withhold energy exports to the United States if Donald Trump went through with his threat to slap punishing tariffs on Canada. He doubled down on that comment today.
We're sending a message to the U.S. You come and attack Ontario, you attack livelihoods of people of Ontario and Canadians. We're going to use every tool in our toolbox to defend Ontarians and Canadians across the border.
Now, Donald Trump was asked to respond to the Premier's comments. He said Doug Ford can say what he wants, but he added the United States should not be subsidizing a whole country. And as for the other premiers today, here is what they had to say about the tact the Ontario Premier is choosing.
We're taking a diplomatic approach, and we're meeting with our allies in the U.S. We're making the case for Alberta oil and gas to be part of the solution to energy affordability, to energy security, and to, generally speaking, North American defense security as well.
Labrador's perspective, we have no interest in stopping the flow of oil and gas, our incredibly valuable and now well sought after world-class oil and gas to the United States, nor do we now have any interest in stopping export of any electrons that could be produced in Labrador to the northeastern seaboard.
Better secure the border. I think we have to do that. It's a lot better than getting 25% tariffs starting on January 21. So I prefer that than starting a war and stopping sending energy to the United States.
Well, with their thoughts on what we're hearing from Doug Ford, we're now joined by our political panel. Susan Smith, a former Liberal strategist, now principal and co-founder of Blue Sky Strategy Group. Cole Hogan, a conservative digital strategist and principal at GT. And George Soule, a former NDP director of communications, now principal at Syntax Strategic. Hello to the three of you.
Hello. Hello.
Hello. So listen, let's begin with Doug Ford, because, you know, Donald Trump essentially said the Ontario Premier can say what he wants to say, but is it a positive or a negative thing for Canadian officials, Premier, Prime Minister, otherwise, to remind American politicians that if you slap tariffs, there will be retaliation?
I think it's great from a Ford perspective, because there is a distinction between the Prime Minister doing something at this stage of the game and the Premier's flexing a little bit. Danielle Smith's got her, I'm going to take the diplomatic approach, which is a little ironic for Danielle Smith, and Ford's flexing, which is what he usually does. But I think it's a really good reminder to Americans with whom Premier Ford and Ontario has an excellent relationship, that we do more than ship goods. There is also critical things like electricity. So I think it's a good flex, and it allows the Prime Minister to come in diplomatically behind and our trade negotiators to come in diplomatically behind. So go Doug Ford, have at it. Yeah,
and a reminder that for the United States, Canada is their #1 source of oil, #1 source for electricity. Cole, what do you say to being this, I guess, forthright at this moment in time?
I think it's a good thing. Doug Ford's U.S. media tour and ad blitz, I think, has been what the country's needed and shows some leadership in this regard that's helpful for the country at large. I think, you know, over time we'll see Doug Ford continue to take this tack with Donald Trump, and I think it's a good thing for him to establish firm lines and say, look, we don't want to cut off energy to the United States, but we will if we have to. And I think that's what the people of Ontario and Canada expect from Doug Ford as he's delivered to them. And I think that, too, you is the difference you've seen between Doug Ford in dealing with Donald Trump and how Justin Trudeau is dealing with Donald Trump.
Okay, I'll pick up on that in a moment. But George, what do you say about being so forceful at this point of negotiations and talk?
Well, I think getting some facts out there is important. I mean, I think we've talked before about how there's not really a Canadian and American auto industry, for instance. That's one of the things that Doug Ford talked about. You know, I used to work for the steel workers, and we would say we actually touch a car more than the auto workers do because parts go back and forth across the border so many times in that process. And reminding Trump that that's the case, you know, and he probably listens to people on Fox News more than he even listens to someone around his dinner table. So getting those facts out is probably a good thing. I mean, my hope is that would happen in a coordinated fashion, though, right? I mean, like, one of the facts that we really need to get through is Ford keeps saying that we owe them $100 billion or $100 trillion or pick a number that he wants to throw out there.
Trump saying that.
Sorry, Trump saying that. Yeah. Trump says that. But the fact is that's because of the oil. It's not actually the deficit. A trade deficit doesn't mean they're subsidizing us. It means that we are giving them more things than they're giving us. Trading, selling. Mm-hmm. And so him understanding that process better is going to be important when these negotiations happen. And that's one of the biggest things that's missing here is a clear Canada-wide explanation of what this process looks like for our two countries. And so starting that, I think, is positive. I just hope that it's part of a bigger plan.
Okay, listen, I'm going to pick up with you, Cole, now, because you mentioned what the Prime Minister is doing. And yes, the comments that Doug Ford has made is getting attention south of the border, but so too is the commentary we heard from the Prime Minister 2 nights ago at that fundraising dinner here in Ottawa, in which he equated Kamala Harris's defeat at the polls with sexism winning again and Americans not voting for a woman. That has received some criticism. Elon Musk calling the Prime Minister a tool. Premier Ford saying that it was not helpful. Cole, what do you say about the Prime Minister's efforts, given that he's trying to create this Team Canada approach and this charm offensive in the U.S.?
Yeah, it doesn't feel like the Team Canada approach, does it? I don't think when we see the Prime Minister getting up here, what exactly does it mean when there is the threat of 25% tariffs that the Prime Minister gets up at a private gala and says the democratic election of President-elect Trump is a threat to women's rights? I don't think that's a strong opening negotiating tactic. And what's more, all throughout 2024, we've seen the Liberal Party, its MPs, its ministers, the Prime Minister himself, draw the false comparison between Donald Trump and Pierre Poilievre. Trump's team saw those attacks, and I don't think the Liberal Party gave much consideration to the fact that they have to work with this guy again. So no wonder the relationship is off to a rough start once again.
Okay, you're giving a bit of a response with your head.
Methinks they doth protest too much. I think Trudeau's position on this has been clear. He didn't call into question the democratic election. He said the Americans didn't elect a woman for the second time. I think Trudeau's damned if he does and damned if he doesn't, right? There's one side that says, you know, he got called governor. Why is he getting pushed around by Trump? And then he stands up and he makes a comment that's actually a statement of fact in the U.S., and people are attacking him for that. I think he might have gotten out of bed on the wrong side. That day he was testy. I was at that dinner. His tone was a little bit interesting. But in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it matters. And I do think Canada will have a coordinated approach, and it may be with premiers like Ford punching in certain places, and then the Prime Minister and his team and everybody that they're activating doing things behind the scenes.
Okay. George, what do you say?
I mean, I don't know. It's another example, I think, of Justin Trudeau kind of virtue signaling. Like the dinner, I have a lot of respect for Equal Voice and the work that they do and talking about that. I mean,
and that was the dinner that was happening in Ottawa.
Was happening at, yeah. And so obviously you're going to try to talk about feminism, and especially in politics. I mean, Justin Trudeau's the leader of a party that's never been led by women. He didn't make a comment about that. And I think, you know, is Donald Trump a threat to women's rights across North America? For sure. No doubt about it. But is the reason he got elected because of sexism, or exclusively because of sexism? Probably not. It certainly played a role. It always does. I've had the pleasure of working with Rachel Notley, Carla Beck, Nicole Turmel, a lot of great leaders in our party, provincial and federal, and I think that's always a challenge for sure. But I think trying to simplify it and try to get an applause line in at a dinner like that on an issue like this, I think was just a misplay.
Okay. Listen, before we're done, I also want to get some commentary because, as you know, there have been news reports about this rift between the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister. Also, a news report that the Prime Minister has tried to reach out once again to Mark Carney to try to get him into cabinet. What does this say to you, Susan, about the unity or the lack of unity right now within the Trudeau cabinet and what is actually happening in Executive Council?
Well, we're at the stage where everybody expects a cabinet shuffle. We know that there are some ministers who aren't running again, and the Prime Minister has to shuffle his cabinet. We know there are 2 ministers who have multiple portfolios. The Prime Minister has to shuffle his cabinet. I've said on this program before, I compare it to line matching, and with the election of Trump, it's like in hockey, when you're the home team, you see who the away team's got in the ice, then you put your players and you line up against that. That's why this shuffle has taken so long to happen. They want to see who's going to be where in the Trump administration. I think it's every Prime Minister's job to bring the best people they can to the table, elected or unelected at the time. They can run after. We have the precedent with Pettigrew and Dion after the Quebec referendum in '95. If Mr. Carney comes to the table, that's good for Canada. Ms. Freeland led our trade negotiations with the U.S. last time around. She's got a massive Rolodex. If the Prime Minister puts her somewhere else, that's an interesting conversation. I think you have to put the best people in the best chairs at the time and deal with the issues of the day, and the most pressing issue of the day for Canada is how we're going to deal with Donald Trump.
Nicole, what do you say about the divisions now being reported on?
Well, this is the same thing that happened to Bill Morneau, isn't it? Bill Morneau advised some form of fiscal caution. The PMO said to hell with it, and then he's out the door. So I wonder who the PMO prefers here in terms of their finance guru. Are they? I know there's been reports of the PMO being displeased with Freeland's communication skills, and again pinning it all on a communications issue, which I don't think is the problem here. So I wonder if Carney's going to have any further success, because I think what the PMO is aiming for is they want what they perceive to be Carney's, perceived credibility on these issues. But I think if he goes in there, they're not going to listen to him, and I think that might be the reason for some of the hesitance on going into government.
Okay, George.
Well, I actually agree completely with what both my colleagues just said.
He gets to stay, right?
We like you.
And I think Justin Trudeau's desperate right now. I think it's just a fact, right? Like when he came in to become leader, he saved the Liberal Party from almost certain destruction, and brought them all the way to government. And so and then he made the Liberal Party of Canada largely the party of Justin Trudeau. And now their numbers are in the low 20s, and if they dip into the teens, that's unprecedented for this party. And so he's trying everything he possibly can to prove that he should still be the leader, because who else is going to lead the Justin Trudeau party other than Justin Trudeau? And how we can make friends and somehow breathe life into a party that just keeps sliding downhill. And I think that's what this move is mostly about.
Yeah, okay. Well, we are still waiting for a cabinet shuffle, so we'll see what happens when that takes place. But before we're done, I want to give you a quick 30 seconds here, George, because as you said, you work for Rachel Notley. Rachel Notley announcing today that she will be leaving politics at the end of the year. Do you have anything to reflect on that?
Well, look, when she won in 2015, it was a surprise to many. I mean, including within the NDP, there's no doubt about it. I think as much to her as anything else. But it's also because of the work that she had done and the pedigree and the length of time that she'd been around that province. She grew up in the north and rural part of the province. Her father obviously, was a Grant Notley broke through as well. I mean, never actually made that obviously to become premier, but was a huge political leader in Alberta. And Rachel picked up that mantle and took it further than anyone ever could, and then became premier and went through a whole lot of tough things in the first couple of years of her time, obviously with growing pains of a new government, but still managed to go through some serious problems within the oil sector, and got a pipeline built to Tidewater for the first time in a generation, and so did a lot of great things. And then even after that, even the subsequent elections, held on to official opposition twice. So in addition to becoming government, it wasn't just a flash in the pan. It is now, and probably will be for quite a while, a two-party system in Alberta, with the NDP always being a threat for government. And I think that's going to be her legacy for the rest of her life. And I wish her well. I mean, there's lots of things for her to do in the future. I'll take all the money in my pockets against all the money in anyone else's pockets for people who think she's going to end up in cabinet for Justin Trudeau. I'll take that bet every day. But lots to see, and I'm looking forward to see what she does next.
Okay. Well, George, thank you for that. Thank you for being here today. And Susan, as always, Cole as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Well, the long simmering dispute over the Churchill Falls Hydro Dam could soon be over. For decades, Quebec has been reselling electricity it buys from that dam and has been cashing in for power it paid only pennies for per kilowatt to attain from Newfoundland and Labrador. But today, the two provinces signed a tentative deal that would see Newfoundland and Labrador paid more, and in return gives Quebec continued access to Churchill Falls, expanded capacity at that site, and a new hydro project to be built on Newfoundland and Labrador's Gull Island.
We started with an unfair old deal. This is the 1969 contract, and we are endeavoring to rip it out.
It's a win-win deal. 200 billion for Andrew, 200 billion for me. It's fair.
Well, with more on the deal signed today, we're now joined by Seamus O'Regan, Member of Parliament for the riding of St. John South Mount Pearl. Seamus, always good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Michael.
Listen, I think it's worthwhile to remind people why this is such a big deal because, you know, Churchill Falls, I don't have to tell you, and what Newfoundland Labrador received from the electricity generated there has been a long-standing issue for people in the province. How deep did that resentment, that grievance actually run?
First, the first power went on the grid from Churchill Falls the year I was born, 1971. It has been a source of somewhat of shame and of embarrassment and anger because it has been such a lucrative deal for Quebec, and we have gotten a pittance from it. And it is one of the largest hydroelectric dams in North America. So this has really been. It was emotional for a lot of us. It was emotional for the Premier at one point today during this announcement, Michael, and I kind of suspected how I may go, so I had a big hanky here. When he talked about how an entire generation now will grow up thinking of the words Churchill Falls deal as a positive thing and not a source of anger and shame and embarrassment. That really, really shook many of us in the audience, and a lot of Newfoundlanders, I would imagine. But this is a different time now. It is a different era. We made an attempt, as you'll recall, with Muskrat Falls to circumvent Quebec and to build our own dam. And, that dam will generate a heck of a lot of electricity, and I think it'd be a tremendous asset for the country and the province. But financially, it was on the backs of ratepayers in this province. So I was involved, and the government was involved in a rate mitigation deal because at that point, all those cost overruns on Muskrat Falls were falling on the ratepayers of the province. So we just kind of felt, God, can we ever get it right? Mm-hmm. And today, we got it right. It's really something. It's a win-win-win, as the Premier described it today. This is a winning deal for the province of Newfoundland and Labrador for a whole host of reasons, but it's a winner for Quebec. This is energy security that they desperately need because they know that all the excess energy that they had for so long and shipping down the eastern seaboard, they need for themselves. And this is a real issue in Quebec, in economic energy security. This will help provide that with upgrades that we're going to be doing to the Upper Churchill project, as well as a whole new project at Gull Island. So they're winners here. And then thirdly, and I can tell you, this is really important to me, I was involved with Premier Brian Tobin's attempt and Lucien Bouchard's attempt back in 1998 to get this, get a similar deal done. We ended up, if you probably in the archives can find the footage, of the Innu people surrounding a house where we were staying. So the press conference was taken over by the Innu, and I had been working as the director of policy to Premier Brian Tobin. I had been working on a PowerPoint presentation on that proposal, which we ended up giving to the country's media in a living room on a bedsheet. So it caused me to think, and I ended up doing my master's dissertation, I'm proud to say, on Innu participation in the Lower Churchill. So for me, this is really hitting home. Seeing friends of mine in the Innu leadership there being treated with the respect that they deserved as a part of this ceremony, that was the three-way win. Yeah, a win for Quebec, a win for Newfoundland and Labrador, a win for the Innu. And, now I'm now since a former Minister of Indigenous Services, this really hits home for me. It's an emotional day for a lot of people. It's going to take a while for this to sink in, but the timing was right on this. A very political deal, I think, ultimately between the new leadership, Premier Fury and Premier Legault, and a good one for the country. This is a whole lot of really good power, an environmental assessment that's already been completed, so it's shovel ready, and this is the kind of power that we need in this country.
Listen,
it's just a terrific deal.
I hear the excitement in your voice, and you talk about the pride, but you know, without a doubt, historic. For Newfoundland and Labrador, incredibly historic. Let's talk about, though, about the economic impact this is going to have for the province, because we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar deal here, beginning with $1 billion for each of the next 17 years for Newfoundland and Labrador. How important is that for the province and the future security it promises for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians?
I was involved in some of the briefs that the province gave yesterday, just with leadership here and elected officials provincially, and it is so much to absorb. $17 billion is the equivalent of the current debt, total debt of the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, which per capita is already the most indebted in the country. So when the Premier says that this changes everything, this changes everything. This is outside of the deals that are being done, you know, the construction of Gull Island and the upgrades to the Upper Churchill and those transmission lines already constitute one of the largest construction projects in North America. Putting that aside, just the $17 billion that basically allows Newfoundland and Labrador for the first time to realize the full market value of the power that it gives Quebec, that alone could clear our debt, could allow us to lower taxes, could allow us to improve our healthcare, our education, our infrastructure to a level that is comparable, or who knows, maybe even better than some parts of Canada. You know, that's why the Premier says this changes everything. It does. This is a huge amount of money for a jurisdiction of 500,000 people. But this realizes the true market value of something that we have been, you know, given away, you know, because of the deal that we signed back then.
Well, Seamus, congratulations on a big day. Someone that has worked on the file and has watched it through his life. Thank you for this. Really appreciate the insight.
Thank you, Michael. Much appreciated.
Well, time now for a look at what else happened in politics today. Alberta announced the creation of a new law enforcement team today. Charged with patrolling the Alberta-U.S. border, the team will consist of 51 officers armed with tactical equipment, patrol dogs, and drones. The team will be responsible for intercepting drugs, weapons, and people coming across the border illegally. Premier Danielle Smith says the move helps keep Alberta's relationship with the United States strong.
Together with federal law enforcement, we'll ensure that our section of the American border is well protected. We'll deny safe haven to criminals looking to operate in both countries. And if we succeed and maintain proper border security, I expect we will have a very strong relationship with the United States, as we always have.
The federal government has reportedly sold its last remaining shares in Air Canada. In 2021, the government bought a 6% stake in the airline, part of a bailout package for Air Canada that was struggling financially because of the global pandemic. It is unclear how much the government is making from the sale. To the Arctic now. As we heard last week, Canada will be making new investments in the north, investments aimed at increasing the country's defense and security presence. As allies like to remind Canada, Russia is our neighbor to the north, which is why NATO wants Canada to focus more on the Arctic, and why the Business Council of Canada is all in, saying military investment should be increased because beyond sovereignty, there are clear economic benefits as well. Well, with more on the issue, we're now joined by Goldy Hyder, President and the CEO of the Business Council of Canada. Goldy, thanks for coming over.
Good to be with you.
So listen, let's begin with the new Arctic foreign policy unveiled by Melanie Joly last week. It follows the Arctic defense policy released by Bill Blair back in April. What kind of economic opportunities does that actually create for Canada? Because we're talking about investment in regions that have been long ignored and in military, which has been long ignored.
Yeah, well, as you said, long ignored, but it's about time that we get our act together on this, because the world is a very complicated place. Canadians see that. I think Canadians understand that the primary fiduciary duty of any federal government is effectively the safety and security and sovereignty of our country and our people. And so we have been laggards. We're being called out on it. You know, what got us here is not going to get us there. It's no longer quietly being communicated in the back halls of Washington or in Europe. They're calling it out, and legitimately so, because we made a commitment. And that commitment was to get to 2% of GDP. We're not there. We're indicating we have a path to it. And so I'm pleased to see that there's at least some effort to get this done, because to your point, there is a real opportunity here. This is not about just the cost side. It's the opportunity side. The building a defense industrial base, integrating it with the American supply chain, for example, creating the jobs, the prosperity that comes with that. That's how you afford the social programs and some of the things that get announced on deficit financing today. They become sustainable when you have a growing economy, and we think defense is a win-win proposition to do that.
Sustainable because it would arguably create revenues for the government that they could then deploy in other areas.
Jobs will be for people who pay taxes, and businesses who pay taxes, and the people who spend money that pay consumption taxes. All of that is how you grow your economy while meeting your commitments and being able to support some of the social programs. And we take that very seriously. There's so many things that are being announced that we think are unsustainable. Our message is grow the economy, and this is one of the places to start.
Okay, well, except, it's interesting, though, because when you talk about you're happy to see the direction the government is going into at this moment in time, you actually want the government to go even further, 2% by 2030, which would move up the timeline that the government has set for itself by a couple of years. You're then looking at 2.5% of GDP spending into NATO investments by 2035, and then 3% afterwards. But that would cost billions of dollars, and we're talking about a government that's already very much in the red. Where do you find that money?
Well, look, first of all, we've been warning that this day would come. We had said all along that if you don't save for the time in which you really need to be ready to spend on investments, this is a government that's been basically running up the tab on a credit card, using the line of credit to pay down the credit card, and now we're being told we need a new roof. And Canadians know they have to manage their own books. They expect our government to make those choices. So we feel very strongly that there opportunity for a program review, for example. Back in 1995, it was a circumstantial that forced us to do it. Let's not get to that place. Let's not let that happen. Get ahead of it. If you look at it proportionally, Michael, back in 1995, the government found about $29 billion savings over a 3-year period. If you were to do that today, proportionally with the growth in our economy and the growth of the size of the federal budget, we'd find $90 billion. So where there's a will, there's a way. But this is a necessity. This is not something that we have a choice over. The country that we share a border with has said, don't count on us just being there for you like we always have been. You need to put skin in the game, and that means governments have to make choices. And we don't think it's a choice to be committing to your own national security.
Okay, can I ask you to fill in the details, though, because you're talking about there's a potential for growth here, there's a potential for revenue growth, productivity growth for the country, but in what industries in particular? Are you talking about shipping, talking about computers? Where do you see Canada growing from this type of investment?
Well, look, let's call it dual use. Whether you're in artificial intelligence, whether you're in quantum, whether you're in cybersecurity, these are the emerging industries. We need to skill our workforce for that. We need to ensure our immigration is economically oriented to bring people, if we don't have them, to be able to do those jobs. We need to interface and integrate, not just with the United States of America, but other allies as well. Michael, it's concerning that Washington has been keeping us on the outside of the room looking in these days. Whether you're talking about Quad, whether you're talking about AUKUS, whether you're talking about the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, whether you're talking about the North Pacific Alliance, this is America saying to Canada, you don't get to come into these rooms anymore unless you put skin in the game. And so this is the beauty of this situation, is they're forcing us to do something that's actually going to be good for us. It's going to help our national security, our ability to take care of our own borders and shores, including in the Arctic, which, if we're not careful, many countries have their eyes on that place, and they don't have good intentions. And so we need to be clear with Canadians. This is not a luxury. It's a requirement.
Now, as we have this discussion, though, and I'm quickly running out of time, I have to ask you, though, we as a country have ignored defense investments in part because the Canadian public has allowed us to ignore defense investments. Are you concerned that, as you make this policy suggestion for this government or any government that follows it, that the public will not be along, that they'll be oppositional to this type of investment?
I think there's lots of indication that the public gets it. In fact, Minister Jolie herself just recently on a radio program over the weekend said she believes very strongly that Canadians do care about defense. I agree. We agree. And so it's important to make the case. We are going to be an election year next year. We hope that this issue is front and center, because what we have said is economic security and national security are inseparable. They're intertwined. They're one and the same thing now, and particularly when you're dealing with America on the cusp of free trade agreement renewals that we hope will go through smoother than is currently anticipated.
Goldy Hyder, appreciate the insight. Thank you for this.
Great to be with you. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. And that is Primetime Politics for this Thursday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow evening. Until then, take care.